The reason it had taken me 4 years to get the EP out in the first place is I'd listen to what I did last time, think, that sucks. Spend a day doing something through this one track, just like tweaking the delay on a synth patch or trying to get the right kick drum. Or sometimes I would feel really excited about it. Sometimes I would feel really despondent about it because I hadn't made any progress. None of that would really matter because I would put it down and then come back to it the next time and go, no, it still sucks. There is joy and self-expression and inventiveness and excitement in the music that I've been making that wasn't on the EP and wasn't really on anything else I'd written up until that point. Going from a place where I was trying to have a very clear idea of what I wanted to create before I even started, and then being constantly disappointed that I was unable to create that thing, to being in a genuinely creative process where I was actually interacting with my material and shaping the material in a way the material was telling me to shape it. I feel satisfied. I feel pleased with this music. It's starting to sound like me as well, stepping closer and closer to something that is uniquely me as opposed to anyone else.
I'm here with Richard, and Richard, well, I don't know if he is in celebratory mood, let's find out, but I got a message from him yesterday saying he's just completed his second album. And the first album he completed with Make an Album with Mike. And the second album he completed while being in my mastermind. How does it feel having now completed 2 albums? How do you feel about that second album?
Playing it to my partner, and we've been kind of doing 1 track a day for the past 2 or 3 days. And the more we go through these, the more I'm kind of going, oh, this is actually pretty good. Actually, well, this is actually all right. I kind of like, oh yeah, okay, this is working. Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like being back in the kind of the discovery part of the Make an Album with Mike process again, where I'm like, oh wow, like sort of listening to it for the first time. I feel satisfied. I feel pleased with this music. It's starting to sound like me as well. That's the other thing that I notice, is that compared to the first album I make, I'm stepping closer and closer to something that is uniquely me as opposed to anyone else, I hope.
Brilliant. And what's interesting there is that the second album that you've just finished is part of a journey that you've been on. And
yeah,
that's something straight away that anyone who hasn't finished an album yet, or is thinking that they don't want, they're not ready to finish an album yet, that needs to take from this, is that you are not Billie Eilish, right? You are not Taylor Swift. And if you are, like, if you're not signed to a major label and aren't, you're not in that position, then your releases aren't the same thing as Hit Me Hard and Soft, right? Which is like a fully formed thing that, needs to be a certain thing. Right? In our situation, we're independent artists without an audience. You can treat your albums, in fact, I would say you want to treat your albums and releases as parts of your journey, parts of your progression. And it's not that you, so for example, and we'll get onto your first album in a second, it's not that the first album that you hate it or that it's something that you're embarrassed by, but it's not the thing. And in fact, that's true of anyone. I can promise you, I bet you, I don't know, but I'll bet that Billie Eilish, when she's 50 years old, will view Hard and Soft as part of her journey to wherever she is when she's 50 years old. So that is actually the journey of an artist. It's constantly getting towards this horizon of sounding more like yourself in any given moment. So can you just tell us a bit about where you were at with your music before you joined Make an Album with Mike and decided to make that first album?
I've been making music for a very, very long time. So I'm the wrong side of my mid-40s now. I'd been going at this since I was about 15. I did a music degree, realized that I couldn't really make a living out of music, went off and got a proper job, did a whole bunch of stuff in between. And all during that time, I'd been trying to write music and record music. And I'd done it in a whole bunch of different genres. I'd done it on my own. I'd done it with other people. I had started bands, stopped bands, hired musicians, worked with musicians before I joined the sort of Make an Album with Mike course. The previous year, I think I had put out an EP, which had taken me the previous 4 years to make. And I put it, I kind of put it out into the world, and absolutely nothing happened. And at that point, I just kind of thought, I just need to do something different. I'm not kind of going back into that process again. And, and it was just, it was super hard. So I was feeling like I'd tried an enormous number of different things, and I just needed a circuit breaker of some description. That's when I kind of fetched up on your doorstep.
I mean, were you actually making music in between the time of releasing that EP and when you started making an album with Mike?
Yes, I was. But what I was doing was back into the same thing that it had taken me. The reason it had taken me 4 years to kind of get the EP out in the first place is that I was sitting down, I would have a track that I was working on. The track would have something in it that I kind of liked. I'd do a session. I'd listen to what I did last time, think, that sucks. Spend a day doing something to this one track to try and make, just like tweaking the delay on a synth patch, or trying to get the right kick drum or something like that. Sometimes I would feel really excited about it, sometimes I would feel really despondent about it because I hadn't made any progress. None of that would really matter because I would put it down and then come back to it the next time and go, no, it still sucks. What are you doing, Richard? And so I think I had it in mind that I would, at some point, all of these songs would be gathered together and they would go onto a record of some description. There were about like 10 or 12 of them. They're still sitting on my hard drive. I still have it in mind at some point I'll go back to that material and do something with it. But honestly, I'm kind of doing other stuff now, and the stuff I'm doing now is way more exciting. So.
Yeah, and just to be, not the album, the EP that you released, after releasing it, what did you kind of feel about that? Like, was it something that you were really happy with, or something else?
No, I was not really happy with it. There are parts of it that I still like, some parts more than others. I was really worried about it not being very good. And so consequently, because before I started that process, I didn't really know anything about how to make an EP. I knew some stuff about recording and things like that, but I didn't really know how to make things sound the way I wanted them to. I was taking a lot of advice from a lot of different people. I was talking to the singer that I was working with, and she had particular takes on what needed to happen, and talking to some of the other musicians, and they had particular takes, and I was kind of got somebody to mix it for me or sit alongside it, and then I did an initial mix, and then he took the mix into another place. And the net result of this was that all of the corners got knocked off it. And it got kind of very, very, I don't want to diss it because it's still out there. And also, like, I've still got about 250 copies of it available on Bandcamp if anybody wants a piece of vinyl.
Link in the show notes.
Link in the show notes. So I was proud that I got it that far, but it was really, it was kind of like the median of a lot of different opinions, and a lot of those opinions were taking me into a really, really safe place that that in retrospect I really didn't want to be at all. You know, I remember sitting kind of with the mix engineer and kind of going, right, we need a whole bunch of bass on this track. And he was like, okay, but not too much bass. And I was like, yeah, no, too much bass. Like too much, like, okay, you know, I really want it to be super bassy. And he's like, yeah, but you need to be able to, like, everything else needs to be able to breathe. And I was like, oh, okay, you're the mix engineer.
I was listening to the recent Tyler the Creator album, and there's a particular point at the start of that where there is definitely too much bass in just the most wonderful way. My son said he listened to it and it was like his head exploded. And now that is, you know, and it's wrong, but it's what you want. Yeah, that's the thing. Okay, yeah. So that took you 3 to 4 years, and I think this is a very frequent experience. And there's nothing wrong necessarily with taking 3 to 4 years to make something. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but let's just talk about the experience. Like, how long has it taken you to make the two? So how many tracks were there on that EP? First of all, was it
4?
Four tracks. Okay, and so you've made 2 albums, and how long have they taken you to make? So how long did the first one take? Do you know what the length was? The reason I want you to be clear about the amount of time is that I think what I'm trying to do is to just demonstrate how it isn't necessarily the case, and this is a nuanced thing that I'm saying here. I'm not saying that you must do things quickly, and that is how you make good stuff. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you can make things quickly, and they could, as a result of that, be better than the things that you do slowly, depending on what you do and how you do it, right? So that is a different, it's almost like people get very either or about this. And so what I'm trying to do is get a very clear view of what you, Richard, were able to do in what amount of time, and what the actual quality result of that was, you know, warts and all. Okay. So with the first album, you started it in September. And when did you finish it on the deadline of the album, or was it a bit afterwards?
No, it was I finished it on the deadline. In actual fact, I think I finished it a week before the deadline or something. I had a bunch of sessions planned that I just didn't need in the end, because I was still spiking through stuff, and I was kind of, oh, this is done now.
So that was 4 months.
That was I think it was. Yeah, it would have been
right.
September. So
just under 4 months. Brilliant. And then with the second album,
that would have been. Well, I started it properly when I finished releasing the third. Well, because the first one had kind of quite a long release process. Yes. So the second one, I started it, I think, it would have been August, like mid-August.
Okay.
I got back into the start of the machine, and I finished it yesterday.
So again, 4 months. So you're on a 4 month, it's around 4 months.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And again, the only reason I'm doing this is just as a demonstration to shake people out of the idea that you must spend loads of time and that will equal it being better. What is your honest opinion? And I don't want you to say anything that you think I want to hear. I don't want you to confirm all I want is your honest opinion of how you think the quality differs between, if at all, between that EP and the albums that you've created. You can kind of compare and contrast the 3 different releases that you've created.
So trying to be sort of a little bit objective about this, but it's really, really hard to be objective about your own music.
Certainly is. That's the problem. That's why taking a very long time doesn't necessarily mean that it ends up being better. Can, but it might not, especially when you're working on your own.
Quality-wise, the first album I did, I was surprised by how easily it sounded really interesting and exciting. Like, I think that's my, when you say sort of quality-wise, like the EP, you could probably slap on in the background in a wine bar and nobody's going to be offended by it. It's not dreadful, not by any stretch of the imagination. And and it's in tune and it's in time, and well, God, you'd hope it would be in tune. You're not. I would. then recording and re-recording, and they're sitting there with Melodyne. And God, anyway. Whereas the first album is like, for me, it's just much more exciting music. It's much more interesting. The palette was suddenly like way bigger. I could go and play and do exciting things with the permission that I gave myself with the first one. The second one was even more like, and now with the first one, I thought I stopped caring what everybody else thought. Now I really don't care what everyone cares. And so quality is a funny word, but I think there is joy and self-expression and inventiveness and excitement in the music that I've been making on the course that wasn't on the EP and wasn't really on anything else I'd written up until that point.
So obviously quality depends on what you define as being quality, because I think some people define quality as being the production, and to me the production is a part of what makes something quality and not the most important part. I mean, it is very important, don't get me wrong, but if I was to say, if you had to get somebody else to help you do something in the making of a piece of music, and it still had to be your piece of music, would you get them to do the mixing and the mastering, or would you get them to actually write the music? Well, obviously, you would you'd get them to do the mixing and the mastering. But that shows you where the actual priority order is. It's in the actual music. And so for me, what you just said, which is, and I think this is actually true, I don't think it's just for me, I think it's actually true, the majority of the quality of a piece of music is in what you are expressing, how you are expressing it uniquely. It's the notes, Mozart. So what is it that changed? So you joined the Make an Album with Mike program, and so what did that initial program change for you? How did you go from, finishing a 4-track EP in 4 years that felt that it was, as you said, knock the corners off, to making an album which isn't perfect, isn't the ultimate expression of everything, but that you feel is much more exciting? What was it in the Make an Album with Mike program that allowed you to do that?
Two things. The first one is just is the tools, right? So the program, your program has structure and it has a bunch of tools. And the first time I did, the way you do it is kind of like very much like don't ask too many questions. Just go away and do this, and trust me, in 3 months you'll have an album. And so I kind of went, well, okay, I paid for this thing. It'd be stupid if I didn't do what you told me to. So I just did the things, and it turned out that 3 months later I had an album. So there's just like, you will do a much better job of describing the tools than me, but there is structure, and there are things that you never find yourself sitting there with a kind of with a blank project in your door going, well, what do I do now? How do I get, there's always the next stage and the next thing you have to do. So that's kind of really useful.
So when you say tools, some people might be thinking I'm kind of giving them plugins, and so could you describe what you mean by tool? What kind of thing are you talking about?
Yeah, actually, because the funny thing was, before I joined the course, I thought you would. Do you know what? I didn't think you were going to give me plugins. I thought you were going to give me like a bunch of templates and macros for organizing projects and stuff, or something.
No, I definitely don't do that.
Something weird like that.
Yeah.
No, the tools are things like the basic premise of this is that you kind of create a lot of music at the start of the process, and you winnow that down to the winners as you go through the process. And the winnowing down involves asking yourself particular questions at particular stages about particular pieces of music. What I mean by a tool is you will have a checklist or something like that at a particular stage, and you will listen to something you've made, and the checklist will say, well, does it have the following features? If so, it goes through to the next round. If not, it goes back in here and you do something different with it. Right? So there are ways of thinking about your music at particular stages that are really helpful in terms of keeping you moving through the process. There's just a really, really basic set of structures. Sorry, basic is completely the wrong word. Don't know why I stuck that in there.
No, I mean, basic's good. It's simple. Yeah. I mean, it's simple. They're meant to be simple. Yeah.
Simple, but not simplistic. Like, you've worked on this stuff a lot, so it kind of really works.
It's that thing. It's that thing. When writers, they will often say, "Oh, could you make it shorter, please?" And they're like, "No, I don't have enough time."
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like these things can seem incredibly simple. Yeah. Or like, well, that's never going to work. I mean, actually, I quite often get comments like this on certain YouTube things. So I say, just do this, and in a kind of sarcastic, like, oh, why have I never tried that sort of thing? As if that will never work. And it's like, well, if you don't try it, then you're not going to find out. So that's. Yeah, so I think they are basic. I mean, some of them are really basic. Almost anyone could do them.
I did want to make this point because it was something that I didn't understand before I actually got into it.
Yeah,
was that I hadn't realised before I started the course, nobody had ever taught me how to write a piece of music. Now, this is bearing in mind, like, I did a music degree and I majored in composition. And as studies with it, so I studied with some fantastic people. Like the people I study with, like my composition professor was like a wonderful, wonderful guy, really insightful, incredible musician. But an awful lot of that period in my life was that I would sit down and write stuff, and you would take it to him and he'd go, oh, okay, well, have you thought about doing this, or have you thought about doing that or anything else? But I'd never actually, the point where you're kind of going from a blank page to whatever the next thing is, or to a finished piece of music, had always been intuitive for me. And that meant that sometimes it worked and a lot of time it didn't work. Yes. And nobody had actually ever given me a set of tools like the ones on your course that actually say, no, this is like, if you've got 24 hours to write a piece of music, this is the way you go about doing it, kind of thing. So that stuff was just amazingly helpful. And then I think the other thing that happened during the process of making an album with Mike, it definitely happened, but I can't quite tell you why it happened, was that I stopped worrying about what other people would think. Right. And that was just like such a massive thing for me, is, the reason it had taken me 4 years to make an EP, like, and by the way, I mean, this was 4 years, like, I was 40 before I even started, and it had been my ambition to make a record for 25 years before that.
Right.
And like, the EP was the furthest I'd got.
Right.
Yeah. And all of that time, this thought was, you've done podcasts on this, and you've done emails on this. It's something you talk about a lot. Just being so bound up with what will other people think? How will I make people, how will I make people like this? I'll put it out there and people will think I'm rubbish. All my musician friends will start laughing at me. It'll be the whole thing will be just like an embarrassing, shameful experience unless I can make the first thing I put out absolutely perfect in every single respect, and through the process of that first making album with Mike, of course, it just fell away, and I can't quite tell you why it fell away, But by the time, the album came out, you never quite get rid of those voices, but they're not going to stop me making music anymore.
Right, exactly. I mean, those voices are useful as long as they haven't become a tyrant. That's the way I've kind of described it. That voice, if it's a tyrant at the moment, it doesn't need to be. And it's not about removing that voice, but it's about putting that voice in its place, which is a useful place. It's a checking mechanism.
Yeah.
But it isn't the way. You don't respond to everything that it says. You go, okay, that may well be true, and it may well not be true. Let's find out by listening to what is actually happening in the music and focusing on where the problems are. So another way I use the tyrant analogy, but let's use another analogy. A lot of people, I think, those voices, it's almost like they're in front of the music. So they've got this lens of all of this fear of what people would think, or is it good enough, or however you frame it. So they're actually looking at that music through this lens, which is it distorts what you're listening to. So you're not actually listening to the music, you're listening to the music through this distorted lens. So it's this kind of fuzzy image. And with many of the things that we do, whether it be in conversations that we have, or whether it be within the music games that we play, the music exercises that we do, or the free writing that we do thinking and all that kind of stuff. It's about actually, we still have the lens, right? So the lens is there. We're not throwing it away. We're not smashing it on the ground, but we're moving it to the side and using it as a tool. So in other words, now we're able to listen to the music. I mean, not 100% objectively, but more objectively, or at least without the distortion of that lens. And then we're able to go, okay, oh yeah, okay, so let me just, right? So we're actually using that checking mechanism in an appropriate way, in the way in which it's supposed to be used, not as a barrier to actually getting to the thing that we're looking for. Was there anything in the program that was difficult? I don't want to just give this kind of rose-tinted rainbows and unicorns image of the program. So what in the program was difficult for you? What did you struggle with in that first Make an Album with Mike?
One of the things that you really emphasize on the course is you use what you've got to get to where you're going as quickly as you possibly can, not as quickly as you possibly can, but, in a kind of expedient fashion.
Yeah, it's like you're working to a deadline. So you're using the deadline as a limitation to make you creative, rather than it just being this endless, when it's good enough. What does that mean? So there's actually it's time bound. Yeah. So
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, this is one of the things that kind of drew me to the course in the first place, that kind of looking into it and that idea of using deadlines and limitations, because like Stravinsky said, the more limitations I place on myself, the freer I become to create.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if there's anybody I'm going to listen to about music, it's Stravinsky.
Absolutely. He was one of my number one. Mozart and Stravinsky were my guys in terms of, classical composers.
Yeah. And then the other thing that drew me to the course was a musician friend of mine who I really, really respect said to me, something which I thought was very, very true at the time, which was the way that you write a good song is that you write 20 bad songs. So these two ideas, that you're using your limitations to push your creativity, and that it's not, I was going to say you're deliberately writing bad things. Actually, there was one point where you do actually tell us to go away and deliberately write a bad piece of music just to see what comes out, which was, an education in itself. I'd love to say that the piece that I wrote during that exercise ended up on the album, but it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot. Yeah, so that's the world's worst splurge. So
But
in each program, I do different games, because what I do is I actually design or choose specific exercises based upon the feedback I'm getting from that individual group. So I think in your group, there were probably, I can't remember, but there were probably a few people who were particularly struggling with this way of creating lots of ideas at the start. So I was like, okay, I need to pull this out. And the rule in that is you've actually got to try to make the worst piece of music you possibly can without it being just noise. It's like you're still making a piece of music. And what that actually does, because what that interestingly does is it makes you realize that if you try and make the best or the worst, it's actually very hard. You're like, oh no, that's not bad enough. Oh no, that's not bad enough. And that gives you a very particular view of this, again, this lens, this quality judgment thing that we are often putting in front of the process. And the point of some of the games isn't necessarily the result. It's what it's teaching you about the process itself, about many things. But in this case, your quality judgment and how it distorts things and how it's kind of unreliable. And I can tell you that on a short or on a TikTok, right? I can say that into a video, but you don't get it until you actually experience it. That's when you get it. And that's when the transformation happens, the shift that you're talking about happens, where you realize, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense.
So the one of the tough things, there's a bit of kind of letting go involved in stepping into that process for the first time. Even though you understand sort of what you're doing is like, I had that so clear in my head: to write one good song, you need to write 20 bad ones. And part of what we're doing here is writing the 20 bad ones. It's still, kind of decades worth of trying to make every single thing that I wrote absolutely perfect. It took a little while to let go of that. And I think the limitations thing was, that was an absolutely fascinating experience, because I remember we had a conversation right at the start of making an album with Mike where I just didn't understand the process at all. And I was going, and you were kind of going, okay, we're going to get to the next bit when we get to the next bit. And I was like, yeah, but dude, I'm going to need to book a horn section.
Yeah, I remember that. I specifically remember that question. Yeah.
I need to get I need to kind of like start calling people and book some studio time so I can actually get the horn parts down. Can you at least tell me at what point I would need to plan to book my horn section? And I remember you went, why do you need a horn section? And I was like, hang on, what? My album's not going to have horns on it? What? I hadn't quite internalized that whatever came out of the other end, I was going to, it was literally going to be just whatever I had lying around, because the structure of the program was such that you don't subsequently go off into Abbey Road with the 24-piece string section. It's like, no, you finish it out. You can if you like, if you want to, at the end of the process, it completely allows for that. But sort of going from a place where I was trying to have a very clear idea of what I wanted to create before I even started, and then being constantly disappointed that I was unable to create that thing, right? To being in a genuinely creative process where I was actually interacting with my material and shaping the material in a way the material was telling me to shape it, rather than waking up in the morning and going, right, if I don't sound like Isaac Hayes by the end of today, I'm a failure. And so my album didn't have a horn section, and I still thought it was the best thing I'd done. I was still stoked with it.
I'm glad that you brought this up, because this is something I think a lot of people struggle with, and they probably don't even think they're struggling with it. So what was the reason, or what is the reason that you thought you needed a horn section? And because we're not saying that you can't have a horn section, that's not the point here. But it's like, but I just want to make it clear to people who maybe are thinking, well, I need to have this, and I need to book that person, and for it to be right, then I need to have these backing singers, and whatever it might be. I sent an email out and saying, to a bunch of people, what's your biggest struggle with making music? And someone wrote back and said money. And I was like, oh, why money? Why is that the biggest problem? And they said, well, because I need backing singers. And that was the first time I'd ever realized that that's how some people think about it. And I was like, to me, it's cart before horse. If I don't have backing singers or money for backing singers, then I'm going to make music without backing singers until I do have the money. Right. And it's not that backing singers bad, but it's just making and finishing now with what I have is the approach that I've always taken. But you thought you needed a horn section, and even though it might be a good thing to do in certain situations, now you don't necessarily need a horn section. What is the change there? What's the shift?
Just to describe the facts of the situation, like the reason that I felt like I needed a horn section was because I find the sound, I'm a timbre person, right? So like the sound world of records and recordings and albums is almost as important to me as the harmony and the melodic texture. Yeah. So that's why I was kind of like thinking, well, instrumentation, I need to and actually sort of having been through this EP where I've been like fighting with Pro Tools for months to make the horns I had recorded actually sound like the horns that I wanted them to sound like. Getting that sound world right is really, really hard. The thing is, like, what I've discovered, and actually what I discovered even more on this album, this other album that I just made, is the world is like full of interesting and exciting sounds that you can use to express whatever it is you want to express. And the important thing is the thing that you're wanting to express. It's not the sound that you use to express it. In terms of my own creativity, I was thinking about, it's almost back to this, like, what will they think kind of thing, right? So it's like, I might have a bunch of ideas and do a bunch of experiments and have a bunch of really things that are really, really interesting for me in terms of making music. But I knew that if I could make a record that sounded exactly like, one of those big Isaac Hayes albums, or actually, like, if I could make a record that sounded like exactly like Portishead, who sampled those big Isaac Hayes albums, right? Whether it was creative or not, like, if it could sound exactly like that, I would know it was good, right? So that was my proxy, is like, if I could recreate that thing, I could somehow let go of my anxiety that the music wasn't good enough. Saying that now, I was looking in completely the wrong direction. Like, that's silly. The way the music gets good enough is by making it good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is silly, because it's understandable. If you look at, and this is broadly speaking, where a lot of what we do comes from, is this understanding of the difference between certainty and uncertainty. So that, and if you just ask yourself the question, right, if this is true, and I think it is true, that the human mind craves certainty, and it will try and find, in a highly uncertain situation, it will try and find certainty almost everywhere. So what you just described is your mind unconsciously, partially, and consciously, partially searching for certainty. So if I have a horn section played by great musicians and beautifully recorded, then I know that has been played beautifully and beautifully recorded. Therefore, it will make the music good enough. So it's almost like you're, as you say, using that as a proxy for, is the music good enough? And people do this in all kinds of different ways. They obsess about the mixing and mastering. And again, there's nothing wrong with getting the mixing and mastering right, but they obsess about it maybe at the wrong time. They obsess about their setup. they decide that they must have a horn section when they don't necessarily need a horn section if the music doesn't require it. There are so many different ways in which people search for this certainty in a highly uncertain environment. And the fact of the matter is that the creative process is the ultimate uncertain environment, and there is no way around that. And recognizing that and then getting comfortable is the wrong word, because again, comfort's the enemy too. So certainty and comfort are the enemy of the creative process. So what you do is you have to proceed forward with uncertainty and doubt and take the steps forward anyway. And there are ways in which we can find certainty. So we can be more certain without reference to these other things that might not be useful. For example, like, what are you expressing? And does the music actually express that? The processes that you use, the deadlines that create, well, I have to complete by this point, that creates certainty. We focus on the number of sessions that you do, that creates certainty. Recognizing that people use these proxies, these ways of creating certainty, which actually hold them back. What I've done in the Make an Album with Mike program is replace them with other ways of creating certainty, which don't hold you back.
Yeah.
That's broadly speaking how the Make an Album with Mike program works, basically. And also there's the certainty of knowing that we're going to be meeting and we're doing this on that day and that on that day. It creates this structure where you're able to move forward. And also being in a group and getting to know the other people in the group, the same faces, and some people lurk and don't say much and other people are very vocal. And that creates the conditions where again, you're still on a daily basis in the creative process, which by definition is uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if this is going to be any good. You just don't. So it's not that it solves that, but again, instead of stressing out that, you haven't got the horn section or or that you haven't got the right piece of equipment or the EQ on the hi-hat is exactly right. Instead of using that, you've got these other things which allow you to move forward. Do you think that's is that a good description of what happens?
Yeah, it is. It is. It absolutely. I think I've relied on those tools sort of almost more in the second album than I have in the first. Right. It's quite interesting. The first album, I created a lot of stuff, and a lot of the stuff I found quite exciting, and I was quite excited about putting it in the album. The second album, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Like, the material is, I'm pleased with it. Right, but I'm not excited in the way that I was in the first album. We talked about maybe that was a good thing, but but now listening back to it, I'm starting to get excited. Now I've actually stopped making it. I'm now excited listening to it. But to get me to this point, it was using those tools in the program that will bring certainty. This is why I'm not still kind of like paddling around wondering exactly what I'm trying to write. I'm like, no, I've done an album. It's finished. It does what it's supposed to do. We're all done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something doing it like this creates, is that you get off the roller coaster of like, oh, it's brilliant. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, it's brilliant. And it's more, okay, I'm doing this thing. And it might seem more, it's not that you're detached from it. It's just you're not so much of a slave to those very changeable emotions.
I think what it is like you're using a better set of heuristics. Like you use a better set of decision-making tools than you had before. If I think about the decision-making tools I had before, which, you kind of kid yourself that it's like whether you like it or not, or whether you think it's any good or not. But actually, it's like, oh God, if I played that to that person, they would think that was terrible. Like, and if I send that to a record label, they think that kick was mixed too high, and and if I put this on in a bar, everybody would leave because like the mid-range is too squeaky or so. Oh God, you're just like the disapproval of your friends and family as a heuristic. Whereas now the decision-making tools in the program are actually sensible decision-making tools.
Yeah, they don't require you to be a mind reader or some kind of seer or prophet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Richard. This has been incredibly insightful, and I'm so glad that you have finished 2 albums, onwards and upwards, as they say. But one thing, I'm going to get you to send me some links, and we're going to put them in the show notes. I don't think your second album's ready to be released yet, so that might not be there. But certainly your first album and also the EP that you finished. What we'll do is we'll put links in the description or show notes or wherever this shows up, the post, so that people can check out your music, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic. I love it when people check out my music.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. It's not the only reason we do it, but it's definitely one of the reasons that we do it. So
Superb.
Thank you so much, Richard.
No, thank you.